The desert evening was dying slow, dragging its last colors across the western sky like a wound that refused to close. Gold bled into rust, then rust into purple until the horizon disappeared behind a thin line of dust. Jed Carver sat by the hearth of his one-room cabin, the smell of old wood smoke thick around him. The place was quiet, too quiet even for his liking. Out there, miles from the nearest town, silence had a weight, and sometimes it pressed down hard enough that a man felt it in his chest. He'd been alone for 3 winters now, ever since the fever took his brother and left him with land no one wanted. Folks in Bisbee said he was either brave or crazy to live so close to Apache territory, but Jed didn't care what they said. Out here, the sky was wide and the nights were honest. That was enough. He was stitching the leather strap of his saddle, hands working slow, when Bo, the old blue heeler, lifted his head and gave a low growl. Jed froze mid-stitch. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, but the dog didn't look away from the door. His ears flattened. Jed listened. Nothing. Just the wind scratching at the walls, whispering through the cracks. Then came the sound, faint, deliberate, the crunch of boots or something heavier stepping over dry soil. Jed set his tools down quietly and reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. Out here, you didn't wait to see who was knocking. The footsteps stopped just outside. Then, without warning, the door creaked open. She stood framed in the doorway, tall, motionless, and backlit by the ghostly light of the moon. For a second, Jed thought it was a trick of his tired eyes. But she was real, realer than the wind, realer than the silence that fell when she entered. Her figure nearly filled the doorway, taller than any man he'd seen. Her long black hair was braided and tied with small feathers that moved as she breathed. Around her shoulders hung a dark cloak dusted with sand, and beneath it, she wore simple deerskin clothing, adorned with turquoise beads that caught the firelight like tiny sparks. Her face was beautiful, but not in the way he was used to. Hers was a face carved by the desert, strong, patient, and ancient all at once. Bo whimpered, tail between his legs. Jed lowered the rifle, his mouth dry. "Evenin'," he managed. She stepped forward slowly, her eyes moving across the room, taking in every detail, the hearth, the worn chair, the rifle, the man who held it. When she finally looked at him again, her gaze didn't waver. "I seek shelter," she said quietly. Her voice was low and even, with a rhythm like the wind through canyon stone. "The storm comes tonight." Jed blinked. "Storm?" He glanced toward the window. The sky outside was clear, painted in silver and indigo. She nodded. "Not rain. Another kind." He hesitated, still gripping the rifle by instinct. She didn't seem dangerous, but there was something about her, something old, like she carried centuries in her stance. Finally, he cleared his throat and stepped aside. "Ain't much, but you're welcome to the fire. Got stew, if you're hungry." She moved past him, the hem of her cloak brushing against the floorboards. Even the air seemed to follow her in, thickening with something unseen. When she sat by the fire, she did it without hurry, every motion deliberate. Jed poured her a bowl and handed it over. "Name's Jed Carver," he said, sitting across from her. "You from the San Pedro tribe?" Her dark eyes flicked to him. "I am from the high canyons. My people no longer live there." He studied her face, trying to read what she wasn't saying. "Sorry to hear that." She didn't answer, just looked into the flames. Her height struck him again as the firelight danced across her skin. She must have been near 7 feet tall. And yet there was nothing awkward about her. Every movement seemed balanced, graceful, as if she belonged more to the wind than to the ground. "You travelin' alone?" he asked after a while. "Yes. Dangerous thing to do out here." She turned to him then, her gaze steady. "It is only dangerous for those who run from what waits for them." He frowned, unsure if she was teasing him or warning him. "And what's waitin'?" "The old spirits," she said simply. "The land remembers." A cold ripple ran down his spine. He'd heard the stories from prospectors, spirits, curses, lost tribes, but never took them for more than tales to pass whiskey over. Still, the way she said it made the air feel heavier. Outside, the wind rose, moaning low through the rocks. The dog whimpered again, creeping closer to Jed's boots. "You talk like you've seen them," he said quietly. "I have," she replied. "And tonight, you will too." Jed stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or load his rifle. "Now hold on, ma'am. My name is Nia." Her tone was calm but final. She looked toward the window again, her face lit in the half-glow of fire and moonlight. "They follow those who disturb their rest. You live on ground that once sang to my people." Jed swallowed hard. I didn't mean no harm to nobody. Just needed a place to build, that's all. The earth does not forget, she murmured. But it can forgive, if it is asked. He frowned. How do you ask something like that? Nia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into the folds of her cloak and pulled out a small pouch. From it, she took a handful of red dust, earth, fine as powder, and sprinkled it into the fire. The flames hissed, changing color for a moment, flickering blue and green before settling again. The earth listens, she said, even to men who stopped believing in her long ago. Jed's heart pounded. He'd seen strange things on the frontier, men shot clean through who kept breathing, horses that found their way home 100 miles out, but this felt different. It wasn't superstition, it was truth wrapped in mystery. He leaned forward slightly. Why are you telling me this? Because the storm does not come for me, she said softly. It comes for you. Before he could reply, the wind slammed against the walls with sudden fury. The lamp shook, and Bo barked, a short, panicked sound. Nia stood, her height seeming to stretch even taller, her eyes catching the fire's glow. Stay inside, she said. Do not open the door until the dawn. What storm are we talking about? He demanded, voice tight. But she was already moving toward the entrance. Wait, where are you going? She stopped with her hand on the doorframe. To stand where my ancestors once stood. To keep the old ones from crossing into this place. Then she turned her head slightly, her voice low but carrying power. Do not fear my height, rancher. It is not me you must fear, it is what crawls beneath the ground when the moon is high. And before Jed could say another word, she stepped out into the night. He stood frozen for a moment, his breath clouding the cold air, then rushed to the door and looked out. She was already walking away, her tall figure cutting a dark line against the pale desert. The moon caught her hair, turning it to silver ribbons that danced behind her. The wind howled louder, swirling sand in furious circles around her, yet she moved without flinching, like a part of the storm itself. Jed shut the door slowly and leaned against it, heart hammering. The dog whimpered again, curling tight at his feet. The cabin creaked, the fire sputtered, and through the walls, faint but clear, he heard it, the sound of distant drums, steady and low, rising from somewhere deep beneath the desert floor. The storm began, without warning. One moment, the desert was still as bone, the next, the wind came shrieking through the canyons like a living thing. The cabin shuddered beneath its fury. Sand and grit pelted the windows, finding their way through cracks in the walls. Jed threw another log into the fire, but even its orange light seemed to waver under the force of the wind outside. He kept glancing at the door, heart pounding. Nia had been gone for near half an hour. The storm she'd spoken of wasn't one of rain or lightning, it was something else, something that made the ground hum like the strings of a distant drum. Bo was pacing, tail low, growling at shadows that hadn't yet appeared. Then, amid the howling wind, came another sound, a low, rhythmic thump. It wasn't thunder, it was slower, deeper, and it grew closer with every beat. Jed grabbed his rifle and crossed to the window. The desert beyond was almost invisible through the sandstorm, the air thick and twisting, but he could make out shapes moving out there, figures that weren't blown by the wind. Human shapes. He froze. There were half a dozen at first, then more. They were walking, not running, their outlines pale in the swirling dust. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, but they were still there. Silent, moving as one. Bo barked, a sharp, terrified sound. Jed's voice was low. Lord help us. The door burst open before he could reach it. Wind and sand exploded into the room, the lantern flickering violently. In the doorway stood Nia. But something was different. Her cloak was gone, and her skin gleamed faintly, like moonlight reflected on still water. She looked taller than before, impossibly tall, her eyes bright with something that wasn't firelight. Stay back, she commanded, her voice echoing strangely, as though it came from the walls themselves. Jed stumbled back, shielding his face from the blowing dust. What's out there? The dead, she said. Those who were buried without peace. He blinked, thinking he must have misheard. What? She moved past him to the center of the room, her presence somehow filling it, the air vibrating with her breath. Your brother, she said quietly. He built this cabin with wood taken from a sacred place. The land remembers. Their bones are beneath us. Jed's throat went dry. He remembered it now. The old canyon where his brother had cut timber, ignoring the stories from the miners that it was Apache burial land. He'd laughed it off, just like Jed had. Now, the laughter seemed a lifetime away. Outside, the drumming grew louder. The figures drew closer, their outlines clearer through the dust, men and women, bare-chested, painted in white clay that glowed faintly in the stormlight. But their faces were hollow, their eyes dark pits that held no life. Jed felt the weight of the rifle in his hands. "You're telling me they're ghosts?" "They are not ghosts," Nia said, her tone calm but fierce. "They are the memory of what was done. You cannot shoot memory, rancher." The floorboards began to tremble beneath their feet. From outside came a groaning sound, like wood splitting, like the desert itself exhaling. Nia reached into her belt and drew out a small carved piece of bone, wrapped in sinew. She pressed it to her lips and whispered words in her language, low, rhythmic, ancient. The sound carried through the storm like a melody buried under thunder. Jed stood frozen. He didn't understand the words, but something in them made his skin crawl. It was power, raw, unshaken, and old. The wind outside slowed. For a moment, the world went eerily still. Then, one by one, the pale shapes stopped moving. The silence that followed was worse than the storm. Nia's voice dropped to a whisper. "They are listening. What do they want?" Jed asked, quietly. "Peace," she said, "and the truth." He shook his head, confused. "Truth about what?" She turned toward him slowly, her eyes glimmering like wet obsidian. "Your brother killed a man of my people. Buried him beneath this cabin. The ground knows it." Jed's blood turned to ice. "That can't be true." Her expression didn't change. "It is." He stared at the floor, where the boards creaked softly, as though something beneath them was moving. He remembered the night his brother came home years ago, hands trembling, saying he'd handled a trespasser who wouldn't leave. Jed hadn't asked questions then. He'd been too tired, too broken from trying to survive the frontier. Now the questions had come to collect their due. "What happens if I believe you?" he asked. "Then we give him peace," she said. "We let the land breathe again. And if I don't?" Her eyes flicked toward the window. The pale shapes were moving again, closing in. "Then the land takes what it is owed." Jed exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He didn't believe in curses, or spirits, or storms that could talk, but he believed what he saw, and what he saw was beyond the world he knew. He set down the rifle. "Tell me what to do." Nia nodded once, solemnly. She knelt near the hearth and brushed the ashes aside, revealing a faint mark burned into the wood. "Here," she said, "dig." He grabbed the shovel from the corner, heart thudding, and began to dig through the floorboards. Dust and splinters flew. The deeper he went, the colder the air became. Bo whimpered, retreating into a corner. Then the shovel hit something hard. He knelt, brushed away the dirt, and froze. A fragment of bone, human, and next to it, a string of turquoise beads. Jed felt bile rise in his throat. "God help me." Nia closed her eyes and began to chant again, the same haunting melody, her voice blending with the wind that had started to circle the cabin once more. The flames dimmed, bending toward her as if listening. The air shimmered. The shapes outside began to fade, their outlines dissolving into dust. The drums slowed, then stopped altogether. When she finally fell silent, the only sound left was the soft crackle of fire. Jed sat back, shaking, covered in dirt. The hole in the floor gaped like a wound. Nia stood, her eyes softer now, her presence less otherworldly. "It is done," she said quietly. "He is free." Jed looked up at her. "And me?" She studied him for a long moment. "You are forgiven, but never forget that this land watches those who walk upon it. Treat it with respect, and it will let you live." He nodded slowly, unable to speak. The wind outside began to ease, the desert settling back into stillness. The stars returned, sharp and cold. Nia walked toward the door. "Wait," he said, standing. "You're leaving." After all that, she turned, her tall figure framed by the moonlight. "My work is done here." "Who are you really?" he asked. "You said you were from the high canyons, but you're more than that." A faint smile touched her lips. "I am what my people remember when they pray for the living." Then she stepped outside, vanishing into the night. Jed followed her to the doorway, but she was already gone. No tracks, no sound, nothing but the quiet rustle of wind through sagebrush. The desert lay calm again, silver under the moon. He looked back into the cabin, to the open hole in the floor, then out toward the horizon where the storm had been. Bo pressed close to his leg, whining softly. Jed took off his hat and held it to his chest. "Thank you," he whispered into the wind, though he wasn't sure if he was thanking her, his brother, or the land itself.